How do we survive introductions? There should be a whole seminar on introductions and their effect on what happens next.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking when she was introducing that when she said synchronicity, I was like, oh yeah, I want to remember to talk about that, but I know I'll forget, so I thought we should designate like one person to remember, to remind us to talk about synchronicity, which maybe should be you, because you're nodding. You're like, yes, that's why I'm here. So just at any point, if it seems like we've forgotten to talk about that, you can just yell it out. Yeah. So that's taken care of.
I don't know what our synchronicity is. I have to confess I loved your movie when I saw it in 2005, not when it opened in San Francisco. I was in the audience. Oh. And the freshness and the sense that things were just happening the way life happens and that everything turned out to be related to everything else.
Yeah.
It was very, very good for me.
Okay.
As a way of going to a movie.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mention that because since then I've been in crisis, which is not, sort of kidding. It's funnier when you're all here.
When do you learn? When does one learn? When will I learn that other people's feelings aren't funny?
Yeah. Well, it's okay. It's mixed in. It's like.
But they are too.
Yeah. Yeah. Careful. So as I mentioned you backstage, I have some expectations that I might, because I just wrapped the movie. I haven't been able to go to therapy for a while, and I don't want to take advantage at all. Like, obviously, I'm not paying you, but they are, and just like if it seems natural and not offensive. I mean, of course, the weird thing about that would be that they're here, but they're here. I feel like a lot of my problems have to do with the audience in some way, in like a symbolic sense, or
And here they are.
And so here they are. So maybe there's a way in which it'll be useful, like once and for all. Like we're not talking about, the audience like as a symbol for like my dad or whatever. Like it's really, like I don't know. Maybe we can make it a useful thing. Okay, so there's that. There's her reminding us about synchronicity. I'm just laying out options. There's the pictures.
I remember when I went to Paris the first time, and I was nervous about going to Paris, and I talked to a woman friend of mine who lives in Paris. Actually, I could maybe name her, a wonderful novelist, Diane Johnson, who wrote Le Divorce, which many of you will have read. And so I talked to Diane, and I said, I'm going to Paris the first time. And I didn't know what I was asking her, but she really read my mind. The usual question is, what do you see? But what I think she read my mind to be asking was, what am I not allowed to see? Because the comment she made was, nothing is interdicted.
Wait, what's interdicted?
Nothing is interdicted. Well,
Sorry,
Diane speaks that way. She just, nothing is interdicted. Nothing is forbidden. Yeah. When you go to Paris, you can do anything. That anything you do in Paris is all right. Nothing is interdicted. And actually, that's what I want when I do therapy with a patient, or have a psychological conversation. I want the open situation. And if we can't say something, that's what I want to analyze. And I want to get us to the point that we could say anything. I think we're already at that point even before we walked on the stage in this case. But nothing is interdicted. I can't imagine anything we couldn't talk about that wouldn't be relevant to what Carl Jung was doing in this book. I can't imagine that. If it is, then he was writing the wrong book and we shouldn't be talking about it.
Yeah, right.
I mean, to me, that is psychology.
Yeah. This reminds me of something also about Paris that I feel like ties in. I remember walking in there and kind of having that feeling like I didn't have your friend to talk to, and so I felt pretty forlorn and like I was missing out on something or somehow in trouble. And then I got to a part of town that was clearly not anywhere you'd want to be, really pretty ugly. And then there was this shop with just like all kinds of crazy old things. I never actually could get in the store, but just seeing it through the window, and there was a sign in French, and it like seemed to indicate that maybe up the street was someone who had the key, but I don't speak French, so that kind of led me on this chase. And anyways, the whole experience of finding the shop and like it reminded me of myself and of my life, and that it's just going to be the accidental things anyways. And it was really like not explaining it that well, but it was like the most reassuring thing, and that's pretty much it everywhere, right? And in the day, okay, we can move on.
Well, we get to a point where words stop, don't we? Rather quickly, at least I find I do.
Yeah.
This book has a strange disjoin between the words and the images. Coming from being a lover of movies, I'm very used, particularly in the kind of movies I love, which are basically American films, and to have the word and the image and the music all coming together in a kind of wonderful way. So it's unsettling to read this book because you will look at an image and then you'll look at the text and then you will note that the text says to look at this image at this point, and you cannot often figure out exactly why. Marvelous as the pictures are, and they seem, the book seems like your favorite children's book, but it's somehow miraculously now presented to you for the first time as an adult with these wonderful illustrations, just like the ones you loved as a child. Except that they're not really illustrations of the text. They have some kind of independent life of their own. Moreover, pieces of the text don't exactly match each other, or one sentence will somehow erase the sentence that came before it in some very peculiar way. So that you reach a certain point where the hidden leitmotif of the book are all the silences and pauses that come when you try to read it. So that the book says a lot of things and many words and many images, but there's a lot of silence and there's also a lot of blindness, like the blindness of Salome. I mean, it's actually an experience. So just with the way you began to peter out is a little bit like what happens when I try to read this book.
Yeah. No, that's like you can't get there only with your mind, is sort of the feeling, and that is such a scary thing to do. Or I often, when I'm scared, when I'm making things, I think, well, it's because you're going into a place you can't get to with you there, with what you think of as you, And so it's like a terrible feeling, not in a dramatic, interesting way, but in like a way like where you fear that there will be no feeling, you know? That to me is often the fear, like that it will be boring, kind of like when you're worried you're missing the meaning, or like it has a kind of a mistake feeling to it, like kind of messed up. And it's so hard, like that's the point where usually you'd be dismissive, or you'd turn the page, or not look more, and it's that place is mostly the place like I'm trying to like bear through, yeah. So petering out, I mean, my God, it's all I seem to do these days. Yeah. Which isn't, yeah, like I was, like that's why, I was sort of worried about coming here actually because of that, because I was thinking like, oh, I'm not, I can like barely finish a sentence, literally these days, and it's today I was having these little panics, like maybe I need to get an MRI. Like I was really going to that place where I was like, is there a reason? Which oddly, this is the last thing to say on that, it made me think of how when I was 14, I suddenly realized that I was dumber than I thought I was, And I thought, well, that really seemed to be true. I never rescinded that thought. I just resolved it by being like, okay, so I'm dumber, and this is what I have to deal with. So I kind of I was trying to think of it today, like, okay, so I can't finish a sentence. Like, that's what I did pretty well with being dumb. Like that was sort of, I tried to take it that way instead of having to be like, what's the problem?
This happens in every single hour that I go through with every patient that I see.
Okay.
I came from a family that really prized intelligence and knowing things. Mm-hmm. And my nickname as a child was the quiz kid. I had to have the answer to everything because that was what was prized. My own father had his IQ published in the Wichita paper when IQs were out, and it was a high IQ.
Wow.
And of course my mother believed mine was even higher. And so there was this big thing about knowing things and always having the answer and being able to get that was good for tests. And what happens when you first are a patient, an analyst is first a patient, I can remember coming into the analytic hour and being appalled by what happened to my brain. I mean, in other words, sometimes I couldn't say anything. And I tried to explain something I've been thinking about all week, and generally being articulate has never been a problem for me, and it wouldn't happen. Jung wrote about this. He studied in Paris with Pierre Janet around 1902, and in those days, Janet, Janet, was the leading psychotherapist in the world. I mean, Freud was relatively new. He had the theory of the subconscious 10 years before Jung had the theory of the unconscious. He was an incredible psychotherapist, and there's lots about him in a book called The Discovery of the Unconscious. And he was really the big man on campus in psychotherapy in 1902. And so Jung wanted to study with him. And Janet had a term in French called abaissement de niveau mental, a lowering of the level or the flow of consciousness. Not a stream of consciousness, as people were beginning to experiment with in literature, but a drying up of consciousness. In other words, as the unconscious came up, not knowing comes up. I mean, unconscious means not knowing. And the problem for both the patient and the analyst is to tolerate not knowing. Jung is talking in this book, he talks about nonsense. He says sense and nonsense.
Yeah.
But nonsense is really no sense. I mean, and it can be literally nothing on your mind, or not sure what's coming next, and it's very painful.
Yeah. I feel like I just tried to make a movie about that while being in it, and it was just, it was hard.
Where are you with that process? I mean, do you have to go now and edit what you've shot, or is that still
Right.
ahead of you?
No. I finished a few weeks ago, and now I'm editing. I edited. Actually, my editor's probably here. We said we stopped early and came here. Yeah.
End of an opus, or in a way, it's like an end of an opus, but much is happening still.
Right. Yeah. I have those dreams. I brought a couple dreams. Should I break those
yeah.
out?
She hasn't been. She did tell me she
Yeah.
brought some dreams, so
Yeah.
we're going to do it.
Okay.
We'll talk about. We'll start there, and then I think we have to start where she and I are, before we can trust ourselves to look together at Jung. You know.
Yeah.
So we'll do it that way,
Right.
not knowing what to do.
Okay. Well, there's two. Hello? Oh, okay. So there's sort of, okay, I'll read this one first. I may have to fill in some of the blanks here. Okay. I married a toy. So I write this right after I woke up, so it's a little disjointed, this one. The toy was the relative of a friend, so practically a relative, people were saying. And the toy's side of the family was awful. And, and I wasn't taking it seriously at all, the marriage, and then suddenly I decided to talk to the toy, which was sitting there on a table, and it was kind of like a square mechanical 8-ball is how I described it. That's not a good description, though. It kind of flipped. It was almost like a Rolodex, and the parts of it were metal, the pages, and there were words on them. And there were actually two toys next to each other, and I talked to the wrong one at first, not my husband. And then there was this old woman nearby, and I pushed her away, and I said, "Give us some space." And then I started talking to it, and the words, its side of the conversation was flipping up on the different pages, and as I read them, his responses, the toy's responses, I realized that I could love him, and it was like an arranged marriage that grows into real love, and I was shocked to realize that, and that's the dream.
Recent dream in the last year?
Well, yeah, in the last year, yeah. Let's see. Yeah.
Watch what you wish for. I've always wondered, loving film as much as I do, and being when I was a medical student, Andrew Sarris's extraordinary piece in Film Culture on Notes on the American Cinema came out. So that was 1962. And it changed my life to suddenly see all the American movies I'd seen in some kind of organized way as a series of visions of different directors. I didn't quite know what I was getting to until I got into Jungian training and realized that what the auteur theory was talking about is the same as what Jung is talking about with active imagination. a process of dialogue with the material. So I always thought, I would love to get closer to what actually happens in the psyche of a director when they work. And of course, we all have nowadays. Everybody has this tremendous education in film. I mean, we really have an American religion around film in some way, and so we all know a great deal about how films are made now. And I know about storyboards and other things. And so, as I'm hearing your dream, I'm bringing to it my thought and my wish, and feeling like it may be coming true, that it's amazing to make this, to see the script and the storyboard and the apparatus all that would have to go into making a film. There has to, at some point, be the moment where, although it's an arranged marriage, you might say, when does it become animated? When does it become a marriage that one can actually invest in? Because if that doesn't happen, then I just think whatever it is that jouissance, if I can dare to use that postmodern word, that playfulness that makes the thing work, that we love in the movies that really speak to us, are ones where everything's been put together, and then there's this extra love of the process that shows on the screen and in the way it's edited and cut and presented in the end. And I feel like we're looking at that miracle taking place.
Right. So the toy husband is sort of my movie, a little bit, where the relationship. It's not that
the way
simple.
of making. Well, I don't know. I don't know how to.
Okay.
Yes, it's your movie, but it's the process of making a movie. I mean, there's so much apparatus to it. I mean, I would think.
It was, my list for the next day is very about the movie. So, maybe it was. I don't know if I got the joie de, or the whatever the thing, but I do know about it. It's
in the dream it comes alive. You do feel like you're getting into it in the dream.
Right.
So to me, it's a strange marriage, but it is a marriage.
Yeah. My husband always is like astounded that I sometimes tell him, like, when I was making my last movie, I sometimes, this is just horrible, but had these feelings like, it was quite hard. I mean, it was hard, and I wasn't super confident or anything throughout it, but I'd have these feelings like I wanted to French kiss it, and that's the best way I can describe the feeling, which is this weird, like, romantic feeling, but with my mouth, And it's not like, because I love myself and my movie so much. It's more like it's almost a form that the anxiety takes, but it is a romantic feeling.
Well, let's take that moment into have and to have not, that everybody knows, where it ends up with, you know how to whistle, don't you? You just put your lips together and blow. Remember that famous Lauren Bacall line to Bogart. But the one, I was thinking of it all day today. It was just on my mind all day today, that scene. But not the famous You Know How to Whistle, but the moment when Bacall first kisses Bogart and nothing happens, and he says, so she tries again to see what it would, that's pretty good, but then she kisses him again, and then she says, it's even better when you help.
Oh, wow.
I think that's Howard Hawks talking to his movie, you see.
Yeah.
There's a moment when the movie helps. You see what I mean? And that's what I'm trying to see, that's what I'm seeing in your dream. There's a moment when you can see that it might actually be fun to kiss.
Yeah. Okay, good. I do feel better. Should I read the other one, or is this?
We better ask them. This is a
you
very
have to
public
say that.
therapy.
This is really so unkind. I mean,
But this is us seeing
is this
what we're
our-
doing together.
okay.
And we
I mean,
have
we
to
all know
develop a dialogue, and we
dreams
have no
yeah.
other choice, so we have
Okay.
to go there.
Okay, good. This one I wrote, sometimes I write it in my journal and sometimes on the computer, and this one. I had just taken the pill and I was sitting at a desk in an empty room and the door was locked and the guards were outside the door and I was just waiting for the pill to take effect. It would kill me. I had decided to do this. I wanted to die. I sat there trying to get the scope of it into my head, that I wouldn't exist in a few minutes. Everything that is me, my whole perspective, would be gone. Suddenly I thought of my parents. Somehow I hadn't thought of them when I decided to do this. I imagined them hearing the news and how completely shocked and devastated they would be. But this wasn't abstract. This was real. It would happen in a few minutes. This would ruin the rest of their lives. I felt it in my very core. I had to protect them from this. I couldn't do it. I stood up, and in that moment, one of the guards came in to see if I was dead yet. I leapt up. I tried to leap up, but I was already dying. It was hard to move. And it was hard to speak, but I said, I don't want to do this. We have to stop it. I can't die. The guard understood the urgency, and amazingly, he had a pill that was an antidote. But he said it might be too late. I had to take it right now. I put it in my mouth, but my mouth was numb, and I couldn't tell if I'd swallowed it or not. I must have. I stood waiting for it to take effect. I waited, and then I opened my mouth just to be sure. There was the pill in my cheek. It hadn't gone down. And I tried to speak. I wanted to scream for the guard to grind up the pill and feed it to me that way, but I couldn't speak, and I realized it was too late. I was really dying now. All I wanted in this last moment was to tell the guard something to tell my parents, but I couldn't speak. It was too late.
And when you woke up from that, were you terribly upset?
Yeah.
Nietzsche was very big for Jung, and there's so many ways in which Zarathustra, thus we say, thus spake Zarathustra, is in the background of the Red Book. It's sort of, and in the background of Jung anyway, because Jung went to the University of Basel, and there were people there who still remembered Nietzsche when he had taught there. So when he was a medical student, he knew people, met people who had known Nietzsche, and that was very important. And then when he went to, became connected with Freud and went to the psychoanalytic congresses, Lou Andreas Salome, that Nietzsche had been in love with, was there. In fact, the Freudians will say, well, that's Salome of Jung's. It's nothing but Lou Andreas Salome, because she was this extraordinary woman, a true soul woman, anima woman, who had been involved with Nietzsche and Rilke, and then and on to Freud. I mean, she was an inspiring woman to many people. So why I'm bringing up Nietzsche in relation to your dream is that Jung had probably taken in so many of the things Nietzsche had to say, and one of the things Nietzsche had to say was the thought of suicide has saved many lives. And that's how I'm hearing this dream. There's a kind of dream in which you play out something negative and try it on all the way and see exactly what that would be like. Jung does a lot of that himself in this book. He will take on something and go all the way with it. And most of us are trying to keep the unconscious at bay. And Jung was too, up to a point. There were certain dreams he had that he didn't want to have. Mm-hmm. I mean, he didn't really want to kill Siegfried, for example, and there were a lot of other things he didn't want to do. But somehow the trend is work with your ambivalence about it, but at some level, how can you know if you don't take enough of it on. I mean, it seems to me at the end of your dream is the clear thought that you really don't want that to happen. You don't want to do that, and you don't want that to happen. Now, I don't know what suicide would mean for you. I would imagine it would be, if it's linked to what we were talking about before, I would imagine one way to commit suicide for you would be not to finish your movie. I mean, because there's some aliveness there that needs to live, and it's hard, and you want to give up, but the dream gives you a chance to see how you really would feel about quitting, and you don't want to. I mean, and I think that's really that to me, the feeling, it's not the action in the dream that I think carries the meaning of the dream. I don't hear this and say, well, that's a heavy dream. You must be very suicidal. You did that in your dream. We have to watch you, put you on guard, all that kind. No, I'm hearing it very differently. What Jung calls compensation, a term he uses a lot about dreams, comes, it seems to me, through feeling. It's the end of this dream is that you really don't want this. And you wish that you hadn't indulged in it as much as you had. So it seems to me that's a tremendous takeaway.
Right.
I mean, if I had that dream, I would know that I wanted to live.
Right, okay. Okay. Yeah, I guess that is sort of also the thing you do in writing or making a movie, or, it's the thing I've been working on right now. I often think well, this is torture. Like what it's actually about is kind of a nightmare in a way. But I feel like sometimes I do think, well, you had to act this out in order, to not live this, and it's a place to kind of do the battles that's not in your life, and yet it is. You have to live through it. I think I was surprised at how much you actually have to feel everything. It's not fiction as much as it seems, because it's all, it all wouldn't do it unless it was real, so that's just been thinking about that.
That is where I think, as a psychologist who maybe gets very close to understanding what an artist goes through, could describe Jung. That you can't get this from reading Jung's essays about Joyce or Picasso, although they're enjoyable. You get the feeling sometimes that Jung doesn't really understand art. But you don't get that feeling if you read the Red Book. In other words, it seems to me that he does understand what it is to go through a process that has a life of its own and that's absolutely real and is an art, and it could kill you to go through it, but it would kill you not to go through it. And it seems to me that what this has done for me, reading this book, is so increase my affection for Jung. There was always a way in which, even though I'm a Jungian analyst, and even though I feel I owe so much to this incredible man who gave us so many things, there was still a way in which I didn't trust him. It's as if he speaks as if from on high, but here I can really feel him as the real deal, the fellow sufferer who's actually going through a process in the way that you just finished describing. It's absolutely real for him, and he doesn't know where it's going.
Right. I know. I have to say, I was, well, first I opened this and I was like, oh, it's all in calligraphy in another language. And, and so I was like, and then much later, I realized it was all typed up in English in the back. And not only that, I mean, completely narcissistically, I was just like, oh my God, we have so much in common. he's going through a crisis, I'm going through a crisis. Like,
and it's cinematic, don't you find it? In many ways cinematic. In fact, I always thought I'd been told that Jung only went to one movie in his life, which was Mark Connelly's Green Pastures. That was a story that went around, but it actually isn't true because he talks about a film called The Student of Prague, and there's a very knowing thing where he meets a bum who doesn't want to work but loves to go to the movies. Mm-hmm. And they had a wonderful dialogue with each other, and the way in which this book reads is very cinematic.
Yeah, I feel like this is, it's also, actually the sort of romantic thing we were talking about with the movie, he's that way about his own soul, you know?
Yes.
And,
yes.
And that sort of got me, like, that really, you know, hunting for your soul or this part of yourself you feel like you've lost as if it was like an ex-lover, something, you know, that, I only have 2 Post-its, and you have a lot of them. But
well, these are just to our images. But you
those
do your Post-its. Come on.
Okay.
Well, yours are orange anyway.
Yeah. I had to bring the whole book for 2 Post-its. I could have just written down the page numbers, I guess. So, wait, he's talking about. I always get confused if he's talking about his soul or God,
right.
Which happens in this book. But yeah, I think it's the soul in this case. So he's. You know, as I rose to the highest point and my hope wanted to look out toward the east, a miracle happened. As I moved toward the east, one from the east hurried toward me. This may be God, actually. Hurried toward me and strove toward the sinking light. I wanted light, he wanted night. I wanted to rise, he wanted to sink. I was dwarfish like a child, while he was enormous like an elementally powerful hero. Knowledge lamed me while he was blinded by the fullness of the light. And so we hurried toward each other. He from the light, I from the darkness. He strong, I weak. He God, I serpent. He ancient, I utterly new. He unknowing, I knowing. He fantastic, I sober. He brave, powerful, I cowardly, cunning. But we were both astonished to see one another on the border between morning and evening. And that's like himself. He's talking on some level, like, you know, yeah, there were, I mean, actually almost every paragraph, I felt like anything less than this level of intensity, I just can't handle right now. So it's very satisfying.
It's very interesting when you're yourself at an edge, the only thing you can read is something that's equally intense. In other words, if you imagine that the last thing you would want is something heavy, but something that isn't heavy doesn't hold your attention.
Right, and isn't reassuring, like, yeah.
The ambition of this book is just magnificent. We all know the Genesis story, but now maybe I'm not a theologian and I probably will say something that's wrong now, but it seems to me that God and the serpent don't have a face-to-face confrontation. It's sort of all acted out through Adam and Eve. So, and Eve listens to the serpent, and Adam listens to Eve against his better judgment. And so we have a situation where the woman is the problem. Of course, we've gone over that a million times. And then God comes back and says, "What have you done?" But God doesn't have a conversation with the serpent, and the serpent doesn't have a conversation with God. Here, Jung is bringing the serpent and God into alignment. Moreover, Jung is calling himself the serpent, which makes a lot of sense to me. It all makes sense if you... What does it mean that Jung is a serpent? I mean, Jung isn't a serpent. He's a Swiss doctor. Well, but he's a human being, and every human being has a spinal cord. Every spinal cord is just a serpent. That's what it is. It's a medulla oblongata. Then you have this serpent.
Right.
And that serpent that we all are, that is pretty cold-blooded and ruthless about trying to get its particular need met in what Nietzsche would call the will to power, but some Freud would call sexuality, and then Jung would call a kind of, ambition of a kind, but then that has to then be brought into relationship with God. What an ambitious... But once it's done, you feel like everything else is sort of trivial. Why wouldn't you put those together? And why didn't someone else put them together long before this?
Yeah, such a good idea.
So maybe we could look at an image. What do you say? There's one on there's a
snake.
serpent. So let's work on Jung.
Okay.
Now, I chose this image.
Okay.
I chose this image. Originally, a few weeks ago, I gave a talk, my first talk on the Red Book in Orange County, and that was a great experience for me because I discovered that I could talk about the Red Book. I was absolutely terrified because it's so big and so daunting, and no, I haven't read every word of it, and so forth and so on, and I don't know when I will. But I found a way to think about it and talk about it, and so that got me started. But I figured, I can't just talk about the text. I have to show some images.
Right.
So then I looked through the book, and this was the first I chose because I just loved it.
Right.
And I've looked at it a long time. I just think it's beautifully designed. I think Jung's color sense and his design sense, I don't know at what level we talk about Jung the artist, but when I looked at it again the other night, I suddenly realized that the shape of the snake is like a bow. And if you take the tail and the head and put this where the string of a bow would be, you get the diagonal going across the picture. So it implies the diagonal that so many artists make so much of. Well, what that says to me is all kinds of things about our snake. In other words, if our snake is that thing that takes aim, we could go a million places. And in the art of archery, we could go to a lot of places, but we all have to have an intention. Freud called it a wish. We all have an experiment to do. We all have to draw the string. We don't have to, but if we don't, and we have to shoot the arrow in the air. It fell to earth, I know not where, but we all have to make at least I feel we all have to make our chance at that.
Yes.
And I think I think he knows that. I mean, in other words, he doesn't say the snake is bad. I'm not going to have anything to do with the snake. I don't want that. I just want the beautiful flower. And will is bad. He knows you have to actually draw your string.
Right. Do you want to, with the next one, do that thing where we say what comes to our head, or I do, or someone does?
With this one? Or
with the next one?
Why don't we go
I
ahead?
don't know.
Let's go to the next one.
Okay, but can I see if, because don't you have
Yes,
trouble with your neck?
Yeah.
So I'll just
Please do.
lie. Let's see if this works. And
oh my.
And this is actually a great view because it's like my whole reality is that. So I'm going to shut my eyes and you do the next one and then I'll look and then what do I do?
I'm just suffused with envy. It's sort of like
you can do it too.
I know, but
okay. It's weird also with the audience.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, you got a good view there.
It's
All right, so we're gonna well, I don't know what next one is.
Okay.
This is 111, so why don't we go to the very first one in our sequence that would be number 1.
Wait, don't show it yet. I'm going to put this. Okay. You tell me when it's up.
That's a
and
wonderful
then I'll
image.
move this.
Red book head.
Okay.
That's going to happen all over this
it's
country.
It's really heavy.
You know?
So, is it up? Okay, it's up.
There.
But wait, what do I do? When I see it?
Now, at a certain point, you're going to risk looking at the image and say what you think.
Oh, just what I think, or what about like free associating?
Exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
so just whatever. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, not going to worry about what comes out. Okay. Right.
We have found out how to read the Red Book.
Yeah.
Now know.
Okay. Mouth, plate in the mouth, like the stretched mouth tribes, and coming out of a bunion, and sort of a boob sort of bunion, and the nose like the European style light plug socket, and
this is really free association. That's
but
great.
Maybe did they have those back then? And blue, like what he's in the background of that thing is a little bit like what I'm seeing right now, and also like you could break it apart like those toys that break apart and take out less arms, and also the thing I've been editing right now, my arms are like this, but then there's one take where they're straight, and that doesn't match. Okay. That's it. Oh, I didn't even look at the side. The side is like kindergarten kicking toys, blocks. Okay.
The side, I'm so glad you talked about this side. You're talking about this figure. See
right,
that
that's the
head,
kicking blocks
that
one.
Sort of Picasso-like head, and then down to the tail. All of that is like something that can go in any angle, in any way it wants.
Yeah, can I have that thing? I didn't know we had that. Oh, wow. Okay, and this part is square. Sorry, I don't have a point yet, but okay, sorry.
Well, I should tell you why I chose this picture.
Yeah, you do.
This really attracted me. This picture attracted me. I was a very good little boy at one level. And then there was another side of me. And I used to sit in front of my mother and try to make my face just as big as possible. And I would just sit there and look at her, and my face would start to puff out. And I would imagine that I was this mean, nasty insect that was just giving my mother an extremely hard time. And that's what I see here. I see this thing making its face and pretending to be an insect. And that to me is something I needed to do over and over and over. And I have to admit, I'm 70 years old, and I still like to do things like this. I still like to get into some nasty face, and I usually do it as play.
Right.
Now, we know that Jung had these terrible rages, and everybody discusses them, and they were with him his entire life. People talked about it from 1,000 points of view. One is, well, he was really not as together as people think. He was really quite crazy and rageful. That's one way. The mad Jung. That's one way.
Right.
The other is people talk about astrologically, had the Leo nature, fiery rages. There are all kinds of stories. There was one time when he wanted cauliflower for dinner when he was quite old, and the vegetable man came around to Kusnacht, and all the vegetables were awful, and Emma Jung just was not about to buy that cauliflower that day. And so she went up to Jung's study and did the thing you don't do to the great man. He was writing one of his essays, and she interrupted him, and she said, Carl, the cauliflower was so bad, we're going to have tomatoes tonight. I said cauliflower! This kind of thing would go on in the home. So I think this is him looking at that piece of himself, that kind of mean, extroverted feeling that he would get, which is very different from that very spiritual, dealing with, the great issues of value in our time. This was just like a very little boy.
Right. It's so funny you say that, because my, unconscious, before, my first thought when I was thinking about what we would do when I just was reading who you were, for some reason the first thing that popped into my head was, oh, maybe we could do funny walks around the stage, And I actually hung on to that for a long time. When I would think about it, I'd be like, oh yeah, we're going to do the funny walks. And I could picture you doing them, and I'd see, around, I pictured we'd do them around the chairs, and then we'd go back to our chairs. And then someone called me from the museum and said something, and passing said oh, and John is just incredible. Just so, it's really, it's so exciting that he's here to talk. And I thought, what was I thinking? And it just went away like that. And since then, I've been kind of at a loss about what this would be like. But now I see I had the right guy. I mean, I'm not, no pressure, to do. But
I walk funny anyway. I mean, that's not a problem. Yeah. I mean, that will happen. But no trickster, no individuation. It's just that's. James Hillman has talked about this. There's so much piety everywhere you turn, and it's just such a delight when we can just recover what we were like when we were two, when we were our terrible twos, and keep going back to that. To me, that's my source. Yeah. I have to be able to go back to that. Right. Many, many years ago, there was a first hour with a woman patient. I remember she came in to the office, and she walked in, and
I'm going to pretend I'm her.
Well, you're going to hear her.
Okay.
And she just walked in and she sat down and she literally went, "Oh, boo-hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo." And I'm looking at this and I'm hearing, first of all, I always thought boo-hoo was something that they just said in books or comic strips. But that's exactly what she had just finished saying. And I'm looking at that, and then the perverse. And then this gigantic smile, like the one that broke the mirror in the story of the Snow Queen, where they took up a mirror to mock the angels, and then this enormous smile came over the mirror and started to break. Well, that enormous smile was starting. And there I'm trying to look. We haven't said anything to each other yet. And I'm trying to look at this woman. And she's a nice young woman. And I'm trying to keep myself from laughing.
Right.
And suddenly, she notices that I'm starting to laugh, and she starts to laugh at me, trying to hold back my laughter. And we sit and laugh together for 10 minutes.
Wow.
Before we say a word to each other.
Oh my
That was how
gosh.
the analysis began.
Amazing.
Well,
where is she now?
A lot happened to her, and I don't want to say any more about it than that.
Confidentiality,
But she would validate that happened.
Okay.
And it really happened, and we had a fantastic experience together. Yeah, we had to go through the tears, but the bonding was in the laughter.
Right. Yeah.
She was like me. She was one of those people who we were very similar. We were both gifted children who were pushed by ambitious parents who thought our gift was wonderful, and so we had to be this perfect divine thing. And what we could be together, what we had to be together, were these babies playing and giggling and being silly and not being perfect. And that was so important to that therapy.
Oh.
And to me, I mean, what she did for me was as much as whatever I did for her.
Yeah. Wait, speaking of women, just like 2 minutes on what was it about the woman who was with Freud and all the different Salome? Like, what was it about her? What was she like? And what?
Lou Andrea Salome. Well, I've read things she's written. She was enormously spirited. I think, am I not right? She was involved with Mahler to some degree at one point too, as I remember. I mean, she got around to geniuses.
Right.
She had some relation to each of these at a different point. I think it was the sense that she could affirm and imbue with a sense that anything could be possible and give a kind of courage to that. The man's anima, is sort of jelly, it's a very sensitive part. It's not something we things fall apart, the sinner cannot hold was said of the anima if it was said of anything. I mean, it's very, very painful for a man. And if you get a woman who can just, as Diane Johnson did for me by making Paris, all of Paris was mine and anything, and I wasn't going to make a mistake. Whatever I did was going to be all right. That was terribly important to something in me which didn't feel I was worthy of that, or so. It organized my anima with a spirit. So I think that kind of woman,
that's what she was like,
adds the spirit and the strength. You can see a picture of her at the Psychoanalytic Congress, and she's a very handsome woman, pretty, but there's a spirit in it. There's a spirit in it that's masculine, although I'm sure that for the men who were entranced by her, that they only saw the feminine. But I think it's the spirit. I think that animus is as important to being an anima woman as as just being feminine is. I mean, and it
Right.
somehow gives the man's anima courage.
Ah, okay. Is there anyone, like, either an actress or someone in this room that she looks like? Just so I can have, like, a visual. I'm suddenly kind of obsessed with her.
The closest I can think of is a bit of the young Miriam Hopkins, a bit of Madeleine Carroll, if you know The Woman in the 39 Steps, if you happen to know that. You know that a somewhat large woman with blonde hair and a sense of an enormous presence and yet high cheekbones, broad face somewhat, and just enormous authority
Right.
in the person.
When you go like this, what what was her body type?
She was like a gorgeous Viking in a certain way. I mean, there was that, you know,
Right,
not
right.
you know, not
Delicate.
svelte opera singer, not
Right,
that,
right.
but just robust
Right.
and broad
blonde.
enough,
Yeah.
but also feminine. As I say, if you
Right.
could remember that Madeleine Carroll as she was in 39 Steps.
I sort of have
Gorgeous,
it's not jumping out,
gorgeous.
but I'm gonna
but
look that
but
up.
also a bit large. We don't have a lot of that anymore. I'm trying to think if there's
Right.
someone in movies today who has some of that.
I guess I don't want to. Yeah, that would be.
Someone who
Do you watch Mad
someone
Men?
who could have that today. Someone who could. Well, actually, do you watch
like-
24? Do you watch that television show?
I've not religiously or anything.
The villain who just
Oh, I don't
died
know.
in the last episode
Okay.
has some of that strength.
So you don't watch Mad Men because there's someone.
Don't watch Mad Men,
Okay.
unfortunately.
All right.
Uh,
Okay. Well, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel like I got it pretty good. Yeah. Yeah.
a challenger,
Right.
a challenger, but a
Okay.
challenge that's fun to rise to.
Right. Yes. Okay. Oh.
I think we're starting to
Synchronicity.
get our audience in now.
Okay.
It's good.
Right. Oh, the next photo.
Let's go.
Okay.
All right.
Oh, is that one? I feel like they know about that one. Maybe. I don't know. There was something from the audience. Okay.
Well, there is a note. There is a note on this one, which I was amazed by this picture when I first saw it. But it's quite. You can't find out what this means in terms of what's being talked about in the Red Book. But while Jung was putting the Red Book together, and you understand that the fantasies took place between October 1913 and April 1914, but then he spends 16 years in writing them the way he wants to, putting them in calligraphy, putting the images together, and pasting them into the book. So it's a long, long work. And while he was doing this, there would be patients coming to his office, and sometimes Jung was a man who tended to give a patient everything he had. And so if he was working on something, it was not out of the question that he would let the patient see what he was working on. I'm not saying he did that every day, but again, nothing was interdicted. He could do that if he felt it was important. So we all know that Jung didn't just go into his midlife crisis because he broke professionally with Sigmund Freud, as the psychoanalysts would have had it for a long time, that the great event in Jung's life was the break with Sigmund Freud. At virtually the same time, not only is the world changing and he's an intuitive man and picking it up, World War I is happening, and he has all these precognitions around World War I, which is a lot more what he was thinking about than the break with Freud. But also, his marriage is entering an extremely complex period because he's taken on a relationship with Tony Wolff. He spent quite a long time deciding whether he would get into that relationship. And eventually he decided that he had to. And now there was Emma Jung, his wife, and there was Tony Wolff. And they were all in this very complicated field of which you may think it's indulgent, but Jung was not exactly proud of this, but this was what presented itself to him and what he and Tony Wolff and Emma Jung had to work on. So here's the footnote. This might be the image one of Jung's patients, Tina Keller, is referring to in the following statement in an interview when she recalled Jung's discussion of his relations with Emma Jung and Tony Wolff while she was in analysis with Jung. Jung once showed me a picture in the book he was painting. And he said, "See these three snakes that are intertwined? This is how we three struggle with this problem." Now, this is what Tina Keller got out of it. She said in an interview, this is many years later in the 60s, so we're talking about, she might have seen this image around 1916, say, or something like that, early in the development of that relationship. She said later, and we're now talking about almost 50 years later, she says, "I can only say that it seemed to me very important that even as a passing phenomenon, here three people were accepting a destiny which was not gone into just for their personal satisfaction." Now, this image means a great deal to me around my feeling about C.G. Jung. I think when you hear, I don't think we should be hearing about other people's love lives the way we do, because we always put our stuff into it. And of course, when I first heard about Jung's involvement with Tony Wolff, I saw it only negatively. I just saw it as self-indulgence or the man or this. I had all that negative. It was not, it didn't feel like integrity to me, and integrity is important to me, and it certainly touched into certain things that happened in my parents' marriage. We don't have a lot of empathy for what life was like before the sexual revolution and what people went through to try to figure out how much they had a right to live their lives. And it was so anyway, I had all my projections onto this. But when I see him doing an image like this, I can only feel his integrity. I mean, he got it. I mean, that is really a human tangle. I mean, that is a human situation. And so did his patient, Tina Keller, get it. Now, a lot of people would say he had no business sharing this with his patient, but it was in the air in Zurich. The gossip was going on. People knew about it. I'm sorry, but I think it was probably the right thing to do to show her that picture, but she certainly got something out of it that I think she probably could get out of it. I don't know. To me, this is an amazing picture of how people's lives can get involved with each other, and I think to reduce it to an Oedipal problem or this is much more complicated than a simple triangle. And I think these things are, so what I am amazed is that in the midst of it, he could produce an image like this. Most people in the midst of something like this come to therapy. These are incredibly painful situations when they're brought to therapy. They're not, as people imagine, the commonest thing that comes to therapy. Actually, they're not the commonest thing. When they come, they are absolute perplexity for all concerned, and it can go on for a very long time. And usually no one in it is capable of coming up with an image as clear as this of how complicated it is.
Right.
So I just want to say that to me it's the association of Tina Keller. It gets me into the image. I'm not sure what Jung was thinking when he wrote it, but it's certainly what he thought of later when he painted it. But he certainly thought of it later and told her that.
Right. Right. And what did they do, the three of them?
Well, if you can imagine it, they had all kinds of associations with each other. I mean, literally, Toni Wolff came to Sunday dinner. She was the president of the Analytical Psychology Club. Emma Jung and Toni Wolff were in the psychology club together. They the two women even went into couple therapy with another Jungian analyst to talk about their relationship. I mean, and then eventually, as often happens with the other woman, Toni Wolff became the odd person out. In the last part of his life, Jung was really in his marriage with Emma Jung, and Toni Wolff was not as important to him as she had been, although he still saw her and so forth. Then finally both women died, first Toni Wolff, then Emma Jung. And Jung was, I think, quite aware of what he'd put other people through. He was quite depressed during that later period. I think there was a lot of pain. I think it was a tangle. It was a tangle. Right. But they tried their best, and you can read about it in Barbara Hanna's biography. One thing Barbara Hanna said, and she knew the people very well, that Emma Jung once said, I had to realize, it took me forever to realize that what he gave to Toni did not take away from me. Now, I don't take that as a justification. And one patient apparently dreamed about it, and Jung said to the patient, I hope you don't take this as any model of how to live. And I got the same idea again, that this was just, they had done the best they could with a situation that emerged for them. And nobody was proud of it.
Yeah. Well, let's, should we take some questions?
Sure.
And let's take a question from a woman and think of her as Toni Wolff. Okay? Just to see how that feels.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you have a question, please raise your hand and wait for the microphone because we are recording.
Okay. There she is, Toni. Okay.
I'm not Toni, but I'm very curious to the extent that you'd like to share a description of the crisis you've been in since your film, the first film.
Right. I was hoping no one remembered that I said that. I was already like, well, let's see, Toni. I guess it's sort of, I'd like to think it's sort of ordinary. Like I probably got sort of self-conscious, like in the simplest sense, I guess. I'd been making things for a long time in a little, just in a way where I often it came in front of an audience without ever having like touched my mind almost. Like it just could come straight out, and that movie did too. It sort of was able to like be mysterious all the way through and right onto the screen, and then And I hadn't really thought about like, oh, if you're in your thing, then you can be seen, and how that would affect me. And it's not like it was a huge movie, but for someone who's actually kind of shy in a weird way, or sensitive or whatever, it really kind of shook me up, being self-aware in that way, and I had to kind of re-figure out through writing and how to actually just do what I'd always done, I guess that was most of it. But yeah, just lots of days that were really, maybe you've had days like this in your situation, that were like it would just be like, if you can just make dinner, and like make a good dinner, like just do that, and like see, and don't, and just buy the ingredients, make the list, buy the ingredients, make dinner, and then gradually kind of approaching writing in that way too, like just almost as if I was sort of like crippled or something, but and I mean, it's never that dramatic when you talk about it, but from the inside, yeah, just a crisis like anyone else's crisis. All right.
It's so nice to hear that happens to creative people. I mean, there are some days when all I can do is make dinner.
Yeah.
And I feel so good if I can make anything of the strange materials. There's that empty, strange deadness. And the important thing is to do something that day. Jung, in the period, would sometimes just make sandcastles and literally almost mud pies in the backyard, and that was important.
Yeah.
To get something flowing. I mean, it also looks like he's got all this thing flowing, but it took 16 years there were lots of dead spaces.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, hello. I was drifting
Hi.
there for a moment. I was struck by something that you said, which had to do with this Tony Miller's effect on Jung. And you said sometimes men need this kind of affirmation, this adoration, this acknowledgement from, despite how she looked. I mean, I think how she looked is kind of interesting in terms of what I'm thinking about. But the fact that you focused on a man needs this, I found that so interesting because, I know you know this, but women need that too. Women need this archetypal man to say, you are amazing, you are genius. So I wondered why you focused on the man.
Well, I think you've done some creative misreading of me, as Harold Bloom would say, and I'll tell you where you made it. Although I want to get the creative in because I'm more interested in what's coming out of you than what I said. We're not playing but I never said adoration, and in fact I wasn't saying a man needs adoration. I never said that. What I said was that a woman's strength can be an inspiration to a man and gives him courage to use his own feminine side. That's what I said. Now, that is equally true for the woman. Now, why wouldn't I have gone there, for instance? I mean, I could have, and in a way I can hear how I should have. So why didn't I? Well, the trouble with these things is that men have been enacting courage for women for a long time. And the trouble with it is it can be preemptive. The man will be the hero. The man will be the courageous one. Now, I'm sitting across from a woman director. There haven't been that many great women directors until very recently, although there certainly have been all through the history of the art form. And this is a woman who has enormous courage and isn't needing a male director to be the one who has the courage to create. You know, that, in other words, so in a way, I didn't even want to go there. You see what I mean? In other words, I was trying to say that the woman can give a certain inspiration and imbue a man's anima with a bit of confidence. I didn't necessarily want to turn around and say that a man's example can give a woman confidence. Of course it can, but the way that got misused was that it all became about the man, and then the woman would do what you said, adore the man who was so competent and achieving, and somehow it got short-circuited. I mean, it seems to me I like the idea that we are all, and not just men and women, all humans are hierophants to each other, as someone once put it to me. We help each other to a higher level. And at a certain moment, one person is modeling the initiative, then the other person takes that in and runs with it. It's like a ball being tossed. The trouble is some of the people, you know, in some of these gender things, it just stays one way forever, and that's gotten us all in a lot of trouble. So I think I was just trying to move away from that. That's what I'd say.
I get that. Okay.
Miranda, what aspects of your work do you find influenced by Jung, if at all?
Oh, well, gosh. I mean, I grew up like in a household where Jungian was like that word was thrown around a lot without having any idea what that was. I just assumed, and like archetypal, like everything.
Your parents did North Atlantic Books,
Yeah,
didn't they? And they
yeah.
put out a book of Jung's writings on nature, edited by Meredith Sabini, The Earth Has a Soul, Jung's
right.
nature writings, and that's published by your parents. So that a
Whoa.
collection of Jung's writings.
I totally knew that. And, damn it. But yeah, I mean, you probably get, and so it was pretty encouraged to, in fact, that is sort of the playing field of how I grew up. Like things were, if they didn't have sort of like a larger symbolic significance, there sort of wasn't anything there. And so I think my rebellion against that was sometimes to, you know, want to be very simple and to want to just be, to think really ordinary things were interesting. And this is not really so much about Jung, but as Jung came into my parents' lives and into my life, like I think he influenced them a lot. And so I took this kind of bastard version and then rebelled against it, and also like really, I think, use it. Like, I mean, it's all completely resonant to me now, having come full circle. But I guess I don't know specifically in my work. I write from my dreams a lot. There's that. Like I have a certain percentage of stories that like come straight out, and I really trust that if I follow the dream in a really unthinking way, that it will lead to the thing that I need to write about if I take it sort of at face value. Maybe along those lines. Okay. Yes.
if what happened from the moment you guys sat down until you started asking questions was perfect for tonight, what would it say? How could you weave that into what you expected to talk about, or I expected to hear in relating to the Red Book? How does that fit in so perfectly with that?
Are you saying it doesn't, or?
No.
Oh, okay.
Well, okay. Didn't we start this by saying didn't you say that what happens is really perfect, just how it happens?
Right.
So if it's
automatically, yeah.
perfect, I'd love to know how you see it. How
Like
does that,
analyze the night already?
Well,
sort of?
how is it demonstrating the wonderfulness or the difficultness of the Red Book? How is it an example?
John.
Well, thank you for calling on me, because the know-it-all wants to know it all. The Red Book revs up to the section that Sonu Shamdasani correctly added, which was not in the original Red Book scrutinies. And you get in it the 7 sermons to the dead and the whole theme of what we owe the dead, and this extraordinary outpouring from Philemon, who preaches to the dead back. They were actually Anabaptists who had died in the Peasants' War back at the earliest period of the Protestant Reformation, and then these extraordinary sermons come. And the sermons are kind of the ultimate statement of all the big ideas in Jungian psychology. And we're in a very different time now than when Jung wrote this. And for an earlier generation of Jungians, the big thing about Jungian psychology was the archetypes and the idea of an amazing unconscious that was a kind of void out of which meaning was emerging, which Philemon speaks of as the pleroma, which means in a way the fullness, but it's an implicit fullness. David Bohm much later called it the implicate order. And some others, existentialists, would call it the implicit, some very pregnant something out of which meaning is born. And for many people, that was a gigantic, exciting thing, these enormous archetypes emerging. Now, in those same sermons, Philemon talks about something else, which he calls the creatura, which is, it's a feminine ending. It means our creatureliness. And that's the little person that actually has to do all the experiencing of these issues in their personal life. I mean, you get it down, the dialogue of self and other in that movie, to 2 feet, which are called me and you, or 2 shoes, but they're 2 feet in a way, me and you, and then everyone we know. I mean, it's kind of, you get it down to 2 little feet. The woman's feet, and you, or the actress, in that, with the shoes on, right down to one person is experiencing this tension, and then that to me is the creatura. That's, in other words, there's no one here but us chickens. You see, it's really like that. And it seems to me that is the one thing that I really think the postmodern has over the modern, is that it never forgets that. David Hockney puts his feet in the Polaroids he takes, and the personal standpoint. And the part of the Red Book I like the best is when I can feel Jung struggling with it all. All these archetypes are swirling around, and he's meeting all these incredible creatures, and their big ideas are, but there's still this human being passing through it all. It's not Nietzsche. It's not just Zarathustra keeps speaking. Jung is there, feeling it and pondering it. And that's the piece that excites me. It's the creatura, the embodied thing. It's what do I like? I like the bug because I could feel the little kid trying to be a big deal. And I that's what excites me in what you, and that's what I think we were trying to start there, to try to get in a personal connection before we just dived into the, the big numinous archetypal things. I hope we're still in that personal connection.
I have some thoughts in that area. And they have to do with feet, coincidentally enough. So that's very synchronous that you mentioned that. And I don't even have to take time with this because we can ask another question and I can see, have you been thinking the same thing I have? Because
Thanks.
of like the books on the floor makes you want to do a thing where each one is like a ski,
Oh, the skis.
Or, okay, two thoughts. One is just that you could do this.
Oh my goodness.
Which you can.
Standing on one's red book.
And then another thought is like, well, but see, I don't think my feet are sticky enough. I've been thinking a lot about skiing around the stage on them, which I feel like if I didn't have stockings on, I could do. But I probably can't speak. But we can do another question now, and we don't even have to take any time on this. And yes, you can stand on one if you want, because that's actually yours. Yeah.
Oh my God. It supports you.
Yeah, he'd be totally fine with it. Yeah.
Well, you may be answering my question as we speak,
Okay.
but it's for both of you. Like, you talk about the importance of not knowing, and the importance of, or that your process is kind of, it's mysterious. It's a mystery right up until it's on the screen. And I'm wondering about if you have ways of nurturing that mystery, or what's your experience of that space, or if I don't even know if it's like holding that space, or if it's just kind of keeping alive in that space.
Yeah. No, you really have to do stuff. Like not check your email, not like you have to actively sort of court it, and because it's so not appealing, pretty much everything else in the world is more appealing than that space. So yeah, I mean, it's like never ending how elaborate I get to try and protect the place, to basically just be uncomfortable in. I mean, it's like put my cell phone in the glove box of the car and then hide the keys and, and then also just like writing. It feels great to have you right there, actually. Honestly, I feel like, so writing, writing, and I mean, you probably know all this. It's bad, it's horrible, but what you're writing, but just keeping on going, all that, and even if it's days or months or years, keeping on going, and then letting go also. Like that's been something that's like I'm pretty good at the discipline part, because that can kind of intersect with various sort of being hard on myselfness, So then you also have to learn the flip part, which is like, that things, you can be in the midst of that process and still like go eat something good, and like that's allowed, like you're not fucking up. In fact, that may be the next step, and so always trying to like not get locked in your way that you think that it works, because maybe that's not in anymore, and then following a lot of like accidents and trusting things that don't feel quite right. But yeah. Okay.
Well, as a therapist, as a method, I mean, early on, I remember reading an interview with someone who at that time was very important in the world. Do you remember Ronald Lang, who, the Scottish psychoanalyst, who did know about Jung? And someone asked him, how do you do psychotherapy? And this is around 1971, an interview, because I was just starting my practice, and I read this. And these are his exact words. I don't know. I make myself vulnerable, and then I see what happens. So what I thought it's all there. A, you don't know. B, you make yourself vulnerable. And C, you see what happens. I mean, that's a complete recipe. And the middle part is very important. There is a choice about making yourself vulnerable, which I think you're describing in your process. For a doctor, you have to give up being the doctor. The doctor means knower. And so there's that moment where you just have to give that up. And if you're lucky, it will happen to you anyway. It happened to me early in my practice. There was a doctor in my practice who died suddenly on the operating table in the middle of elective surgery. And a female figure in my dreams turned blue right after that. And so for about 6 months I was depressed, and it's triggered something in me. And I finally realized that in a certain way, at that point, the doctor in me died. And then I began dreaming about nurses and attendants, other people in hospitals, and somehow it changed the way I held what I did. I just stopped being the one who was in control and knew. And I mean, the doctor didn't die, but at one level, but in another way it did. And it was very important to me to get past that male knower. And I think that's what Lang was aiming at. Now, it's very dangerous, It doesn't always, making yourself vulnerable can also be an indulgence, a lot of people. But nevertheless, I think he was on the right track with that idea.
Hi, I wanted to ask, Mick, I was noticing your book is a very similar color, Miranda's book. Yeah. No One Belongs Here more than the actual red book, which isn't quite so red. But they have two processes that made them active imagination through the red book, as you discussed. And I was wondering if Miranda could maybe talk, because her work seems so much about empathy, both in her performances and in the characters in the book. And empathy also seems part of active imagination. And I was wondering if you each could talk about that empathy where you put yourself in another's situation or body or other things and then let them speak. First, Miranda, maybe?
Let's stay on the books, but be in a new position on that. Okay. Okay. Good. Like it. Yeah.
Good.
Well, I think for me, the empathy, the thing I was saying about being hard on myself, whatever, Miranda, that's an example of it. Sometimes it's so crushing, like I'm barely letting myself have anything throughout the day. And then when I'm writing, it's like this little place where I'm allowed to actually feel love for myself. But it works best if I kind of do it through these people I'm not even thinking of as myself. But it's like all this sort of tenderness can come out, or just like observing, or something that has a little more room in it. And that's so old for me, and such a relief, and such a thing that I need, regardless of all the other things that writing does. Just I need that. So that's one thing about it.
I think empathy, if I may just say a moment about your film. I mean, empathy is almost your method. I mean, it's incredible in that film, if one can use a word like that. There are two scenes, if you've not seen Me and You and Everyone You Know, there are two scenes which are quite amazing, and they stand up with the best scenes in any films. One is of course, the goldfish that someone has left on the roof of a car, and then the car has gone off, and then she sees that it's there and knows that it's going to fall off, and wants to say a prayer for it. And then there's a moment of potential rescue when the bowl falls onto the dash of another, the front of another hood of another car, and there's a feeling like maybe there'll be a reprieve, and everyone hopes, and then there's that moment when it falls off, and that's going to be it and that is an incredible scene, and it depends on the empathy for the life of that fish that cannot. It's very moving. The other one, which is incredibly complicated sequence, but very, very, it's almost right up there with, but with some certain things in Chaplin. That there's a moment when she talks, if you've seen City Lights, you know what I'm talking about. It's so amazing that when anything reaches that level, it just happened to be by him first. But there's the sequence when, of course, she knows right away with her intuition that this man who sells shoes is the man for her, and they're playing, and then there's that moment where they let each other go, and they've had a life together just in a few minutes, all made up and led by her. And then she makes a mistake, so to speak. If it's a mistake, she turns up again and says, you could drive me home. And she gets into the car with him. And then he looks at her and says, will you get out of the car? And she looks at him and says, did I just invite myself into your car? And, she's utterly in his frame of mind as to how he could feel terribly frightened and intruded upon, and is she a sociopath? What kind of person is she? At the same time, she can't believe that he's breaking the connection. The pain on her face is just there, and it's an exquisite scene. It was the thing wouldn't work without her empathy for what he's feeling, at the same time as that she can't believe that he would break their connection, at least at that moment. And of course, it's all resolved when he finally accepts her, and then she puts her arm around him and his whole body, and they're together at last. But it's an incredible, incredible sequence that depends entirely on the fact that we are creatures feeling each other's feelings, even as we're hurting and being hurt by each other and making our mistakes. It's very beautiful. And I personally live for moments like that in movies, and they don't come very often. But I think that's empathy. Now Jung is working at that level in this book. I think the book is red because red is the color of feeling, and I think Jung is working on his feeling in this book. It's not really about finding the anima, the self, and God so much as it's a rather priggish, narrow man with a very high-minded idea about what spirituality is, getting down and dirty with what spirituality really is, and changing his feeling in the process. There's a whole dialogue with the devil, who's the red one, who takes Jung to task for being this high-minded, introverted feeling, noble person who, and then they even talks about something that we haven't mentioned here, Jung's anti-Semitism. Jung says something, and the red one says, "You sound anti-Semitic to me." And we get the closest inner confrontation with that specific problem in Jung, and it's not what people always say. It's not Nazism, it's not political, it's not that he didn't understand the value of Jewish people, but in some kind of priggish Christian way, he actually thought that Jewish spirituality was incomplete and it's not quite as wonderful and noble as the Christian spirituality. And the Red One just moves right in on this and forces him to disclose his snobbishness. And Jung comes across as a hyper-serious Christian pastor's son who gets a glimmer of the idea that that is not going to make it. That is not, you're not going to get there that way. If you're going to imitate Christ, go the whole way. Go all the way down to hell. Take on the suffering. But don't just stay in this snobbish, introverted feeling. So he's working on his trickster shadow and integrating the other side of his feeling, which is a much more human, extroverted feeling, which kind of begins to connect him up with everybody's feeling everywhere. Now, nobody can complete this work, but considering where he had been, the kind of spiritual snob he had been, to what he became as a result of this, it was a remarkable rescue of human feeling. And I would say that for each of us, if we could do just that, that to me is enough. I don't need to do all the other things with the archetypes, just that. And that's the work that I think is being recorded. And it's the kind of work that some people do in middle life. It's a work where you come down off your most lofty perch. And I feel that's what's going on in the Red Book.
Well,
Thank you.
All right. Okay. That seems like a good place to end. Thank you. Yeah.